Good evening, everyone. This is Mike Romali here with the severe weather outlook and discussion for November 22nd, 2020, recorded around 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, first of all, this is the day 3 forecast valid for Tuesday into Wednesday morning. This is a marginal risk for severe weather highlighted across portions of the Midwest United States and portions of the Southeast, including portions of Mississippi and into northeastern Louisiana. You can see here today. This is the day 3 forecast. Again, expecting a marginal risk for severe storms across a broad area as a area of low pressure begins to develop from lee cyclogenesis across the Colorado Rockies and moves generally towards the north and east here over the next several days. Now, this kind of coincides here with the greatest area of tornado probabilities. This is coming from directly from the Storm Prediction Center. Climatology based from 1982 all the way up till 2011. And again, we can see here that a lot of this area highlighted within the SPC forecast here does go to include that area. And there is the threat for some isolated tornadoes, which we'll talk about here getting into the forecast. We're going to talk about a lot of the dynamical support today and what is kind of the main limiting factor with regards to this upcoming severe weather event. So we'll start here and look at the GFS forecast. This is just the regular precipitation field here on the GFS forecast. And what we can really kind of dive into here is first and foremost, this is valid as of tonight about 8 o'clock, or really 7 o'clock actually, so in about 30 minutes. This is the actual forecast, and if we kind of compare that to what's been going on out there right now, we can see that it is picking up an area of cooler, temperatures here across portions of northern Indiana and northwestern Ohio, and it's not picking up on a lot of snow and precipitation. But if we actually look here at the actual precipitation, we can see that there is some snow in this area, generally, kind of generally towards the west here, really of Interstate 75, and then there's some more snow up here all the way up into portions of Michigan. So there's definitely a lot of snow, or not a lot, but there is some snow showers across this area. Not a lot of significant precipitation, and you can see there is also expected to be a line of rain across the Pittsburgh area. So if we actually jump down to the Pittsburgh site here, we can actually see whether or not the forecast is really valid. And indeed, it does look like there is some precipitation out in this region. So the forecast, pretty valid as of right now. It's got a pretty good handle on the overall situation. So that means that the forecast is going to be relatively accurate for at least the moment. So if we now jump back to the forecast here again, we can see all of this cold air now beginning to dive in. And this is because we have a little bit of an Alberta clipper that's actually kind of moving across to the north and east and kind of bringing a shot of cooler air down. Also with the ridge of high pressure to the north, kind of driving this cooler air down behind it. So you're actually getting some of these snow showers in the moisture field. And if we actually kind of sample this environment right now, we can kind of see that the environment is definitely moist. It's got a high relative humidity value all the way up and, through the first about, 3 kilometers or so before it starts to taper off. But definitely freezing conditions there, bringing some snow and some snowy weather. So now if we move forward with time, we can actually see what's going to start to happen is we get a storm system that is going to develop really across from lee cyclogenesis. And what this basically means is out across the Colorado Rockies, we're going to have an area of low pressure develop on the lee side of the Colorado Rocky Range, and that is going to generally track towards the north and east in a similar fashion like that and possibly become included up in this general vicinity. So what we can see here in the GFS forecast is we have this occluded front right here. It's, back behind all this. And our cold front is right about here with your warm front that's kind of sitting right across like here. somewhere in that fashion, and then you've got your occluded front kind of behind like that. So you can kind of see those general factors there working into the overall forecast here at 60 hours from now, and by 72, this is out to 78 hours. We can see this has become an occluded area of low pressure way up now towards the north. Again, you can actually see though the front is dissipating. There's not a tremendous amount of actual kind of evidence that there's a front in that region, but you can kind of see that there's definitely an area of low pressure back in here. So we can definitely kind of see that, but then you can also see that it really tapers off back here towards the south. You don't really see any evidence. You may see a couple of thickness gradients here, but those thickness gradients are very spread out, and they don't become closer up until you'll get into Indiana. So the closer you get up to this occluded low here is the closer you're going to get to those gradients. And certainly we just don't see any significant potential for a very powerful early season front at the moment. And if we can kind of continue to move this out here, this is hour 90. Again, you can see overall that the thickness gradients here are very spaced out. And this really just kind of represents that we don't have a front that is really in this general area down here towards the south. So this really goes to show that this is a very weak front. But let's go look here at the 2-meter dew points. So these are the dew point temperatures as of 18Z today. So we'll move this out to 0Z. So here in about 20 minutes, this is what the dew points are looking like. Again, this trail of moisture, which is evident here via the Pittsburgh radar, we can see that some of the moisture is producing some showers, light to moderate rain showers, cold rain, across portions of the Pittsburgh metro, in through Monroeville, etc. We do have some rain showers up and through that region, and this will be quickly exiting over the next several hours. And we also have a semi-cold front across this region. You can kind of see it's a very weak front, but it is there nonetheless. Now, this will be skirting off here. This is by tomorrow at 1 p.m. Again, very dry across most of the United States. Really, the only moisture is back here across the lower parts of Texas and extreme southern Oklahoma, and then across Carolina, coastal Carolina, and coastal Georgia as well. Now, later in the week, we can kind of see what's going to happen here. What we're going to do is we're actually going to switch this out here to the central United States so we can kind of get a look at what's going on. So we'll kind of move this out here. So here is tomorrow. Now you can see that we have a stretch here of general southerly advection that's going to come out, really coming from the Gulf and running all the way across to the plains. And because of that, you have an area of moisture, a tongue of moisture that it's not as big. And if we can actually go back here and look at the skew T diagrams, this is again all tomorrow at 1 o'clock. We can see that the temperature and dew point, there's a large temperature and dew point deficit in through here. And we can see that there's not a significant amount of large scale subsidence in the atmosphere, but at the very surface, the dew point is actually very weak and it actually increases a little bit with height. So that means we're definitely getting some warm air advection going on. Now, if we sample the dew point out here across portions of the high plains, we can definitely see that the temperature dew point spread is still very noticeable, but it's a lot closer together, and you have more of a moist atmosphere. There is definitely a temperature inversion in through here. This increase with height is the thermal inversion, and then everything above that is going to be the tropical air mass in through here. Now, wind across here is going to be generally out of the southwest, so we got southwest wind at about 15 to 20 knots, so it's going to be a bit breezy there tomorrow. Now, as we go forth with time, notice what starts to happen is we get deep southerly advection carrying this moisture now deeply in through the high plains. And again, it's not very deep moisture. You can see that this is generally under about 55 Fahrenheit. But if we actually go back here, this is south here of the least cyclogenesis. We notice southerly winds here in the first 0 to 1 kilometer layer and a very close temperature dew point spread with a weak lapse rate. So this is definitely indicative that we have a moisture return, and you can also follow the isobars here following around there. So definitely seemingly getting some warm air advection that is going to be occurring, and that moisture plume is going to continue to increase. And you can see out here as the area of low pressure begins to consolidate out here, crossing from the Colorado Rockies, undergoing least cyclogenesis, and now sitting over really the portions of Nebraska or portions of Kansas, rather central Kansas. And again, this is going to be skirting towards the north and east with time. But you notice what's occurring here. A deep fetch of tropical moisture is now surging northward all the way into portions of Texas and Oklahoma. Now, this is again very late Wednesday or very late Tuesday evening. This is really by 7 p.m. Now, you notice where the marginal risk begins. It really begins here across southeast Texas and even goes up to include portions of Kansas as well. Now, we can look here on the GFS forecast, and again, this is all going to be generally anywhere north of these 55-degree dew points. This is all going to be elevated thunderstorms. We're not going to have a lot of surface based convection at the moment. Now, what you will have is a very tight gradient out here. You will have a very big wind, very big pressure gradient, or not a fairly big, but you'll have a pressure gradient. And this pressure gradient is going to cause, along with the surface pressure falls, you're going to have certainly some wind out in this region. And that is going to definitely promote windy conditions. And if any of those windy conditions, end up getting mixed down in thunderstorms, you could easily get a couple of severe thunderstorms in that vicinity. Now, if we look for the same time down here in Texas and Oklahoma, we can see that we actually do get some tornado parameters. Although the instability is not all that good, there's actually a little bit of a capping inversion. We can see here at the surface-based cap here, the SIN is over 130. So that means that surface-based thunderstorms are likely going to be hard to come by for this time. So you're probably not going to get tornadoes in this type of environment. If this, you want tornadoes out across this, you're probably not going to get a fair amount of tornadoes because there is decent capping in through here. We do have a capping inversion. And again, you would at least need to warm that, a couple of more degrees and able to actually have that. And this is during the night, so the temperature wouldn't be really warming so much. So this definitely indicates no tornadoes, or if we do get some thunderstorms, we're probably not going to see any significant tornadoes. Again, you can see the temperature dew point spread fairly tight here, so that's definitely respectable. But it is a little bit too moist in the atmosphere. We see a little bit too moist here. Generally, if you want some significant tornadoes, you would like to see that really stout here in the first 0 to 3 kilometers and then start to really kind of taper off a little bit more, something like that, before kind of following a profile similar to that. That's what you would want to see here. And for the temperature line, you could easily get tornadoes with that type of sounding here and a fairly decent cap or a decent area there. If you can modify the profile to be something like that, you would probably get a decent tornado sounding here. This would definitely be one of those situations where you would probably have a fairly good and respectable tornado event if you could modify the sounding like that. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to. Now, the hodograph, which we talked about earlier in today's earlier video, you can see the hodograph here is actually fairly respectable at this moment. What we actually have here is generally that we have wind here at the surface at about 20 knots, but quickly you can see the curvature in the first 1 kilometer even. And then in through the 2 and 3 kilometer range, we have a fairly good curved hodograph. Notice these storm motions though, 241 degrees relative to true north and 43 knots. So 43 knots, that's certainly going to be getting up there closer to 50 miles per hour. So, this is going to be one of those situations where the storm is going to be generally moving towards the northwest here, or northeast rather, at about 50 miles per hour. So these are going to be fast moving cells, and this type of profile certainly points towards a linear convection mode rather than seeing discrete supercells in this environment. Now, if we continue to move forward with time here, we're actually going to switch once again to the Ohio Valley region, and we'll kind of pop back on here. So now the storm system is kind of coming out across portions of the Arkansas area, and now rapidly moving eastward. You can see our area of low pressure right there across Missouri, coming into Missouri right now, and then moving towards the north and east here. Again, this will be occluding as time goes on, and the front will become less distinct across this area and will eventually wash out. But what you'll end up seeing here is this deep warm air advection. Now, you notice here, this is by Wednesday, very early in the morning at 1 o'clock, and we don't have a substantial amount of moisture advection across portions of Alabama and northeastern Mississippi. Now, remember where the initial day 3 forecast is right now. This goes out to 12Z Wednesday. So at 7 a.m. Wednesday morning, this forecast is no longer valid. So this is valid from 12Z Tuesday, 7 a.m. Tuesday to 7 a.m. Wednesday, a 24-hour time period. Now you can see there is a marginal risk for severe weather, including portions of Tennessee, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Now let's take a look here at the forecast for that region. Also, I think that this area will probably be modified to drop some of this marginal risk across these areas, but you could still see a severe wind gust or two. So the marginal risk right now seems to be the best fit. Now, we'll jump out here to about 12Z on Wednesday. You can see the moisture advection rapidly moving eastward with time. We have our occluded front here and our cold front with a warm front extending something like that at the point. And then we have an occluded front that is wrapping back into that area right there. So that's our occluded front right there. Our cold front with our warm front, similar to that. And right really in through this region is going to be your warm air advection. This is going to be the warm air advection and your warm sector. So this is basically going to be the warm sector. Now, you would generally think, okay, this area, it's near the warm front, would be fairly sufficient for tornadoes. So if we actually take a sounding out here, closer to that, you can see that that definitely is the case. The low-level wind field is certainly very backed here. It's definitely very backed. We have a very curved hodograph in the 0 to 3 kilometer range. And storm motions would generally be 228 degrees relative to true north and 32 knots. So roughly closing in there on about 38 to 39 miles per hour. Now, the one thing you'll notice here, though, is the surface temperature only at 52 degrees Fahrenheit. So this would indicate here that you're probably not going to get a fairly significant amount of storm development. And you can actually see there's a relatively, decent inversion here. The lifted index is certainly not that high at all. You do have a relatively high moisture content. Again, this is very characteristic with the warm front in this general vicinity. And you can also see the very classical signs of a frontal inversion and a thermal inversion. So this is definitely all signs towards a warm front in this vicinity. Very deep layer shear as well, but the temperature and dew point is very lacking. Now, so this is kind of the warm front sector right here. Let's go try somewhere right along the cold front. What are we getting in terms of the moisture in that area? So we can actually see here that we have a little bit better sounding, but there is a lot of convective inhibition across this area. You can see the SIN values in the surface layer at about 120. Definitely, all of the signs right now are certainly pointing towards this being an elevated type of situation. If we go even further out in time, we can see that this cold front eventually just kind of washes away as this area just skirts up towards the north. This cold front really just kind of washes away, and we get the return of moisture, the residual moisture, tropical air residing across portions of the southeast United States by about Friday. Now, if we look here at the surface to 500 millibar bulk shear values, you also notice that what starts to happen here is the front begins to wash away. This is the actual front This is the actual front, right about in this general vicinity, right across here. This is really the actual front. Excuse me, this is the front itself across this general vicinity. And what you can really notice is that with time the front actually becomes very less defined, and you can actually see here, this is by Thursday, there's not much of a front to speak of in this region. You can see generally zonal winds across here. You just notice generally zonal winds across here. They do back in this region right here, maybe in response to an area of high pressure developing, but not really seeing any substantial signs of this front being a very strong potent system. For what it's worth here, the European forecast model is much of the same solution here. So if we move this out here, this is by Wednesday or Tuesday evening going into Wednesday. You can see this very deep moisture advection here surging across the high plains and the lower plains. And eventually this begins to move. Now, you can see here on the Euro forecast, what we actually have is we have our cold front trailing something like that. Our warm front actually extends something up generally in this vicinity right through here. And then we also have kind of our occluded front, kind of a little bit hard to tell, but our occluded front is somewhere up in this region right through here. Now you can see that the warm front is more towards the north, but the dew points are not that high. You can see that, dew points are just struggling to get out of the upper 50s across southern Indiana and southern Illinois, so not really seeing a very good synoptic setup for tornadoes there. But these dew points, especially down across portions of Alabama and Mississippi, could support a couple of isolated tornadoes, and certainly some gusty winds, if any, can be mixed down to the surface. And then again, you can just see how this front will begin to be mixed out with time. That front really does not make it very far south here. You can see maybe a little bit of evidence of this front kind of sagging southward here, but moisture begins to return once again in response due to that southerly fetch across there. And the 500 surface to 500 millibar, futures here. This is the bulk shear. A tad bit more bulk shear across this general vicinity by Wednesday afternoon. This is by 1 p.m. So this would definitely support maybe some isolated severe storms across this area. But I definitely do not see the threat of a major outbreak at this time. Now, for what it's worth here, this is the NAM forecast model as well, going over much of the same here, the NAM 3 kilometer, and this is also looking here at the GEM forecast. This is the Canadian forecast model. You can see, again, much of the same here. We got our cold front kind of extending down like that. Our warm front is kind of right along in this general vicinity. And then we have kind of our occluded front back in through this general vicinity and through here. And you can actually see here, if we take a sample, again, in the warm sector, you'll generally notice that we don't have a lot of instability. So this is definitely indicative that we will probably not see a very high tornado threat this upcoming Wednesday, but certainly could see some gusty winds. Maybe the occasional threat of an isolated tornado or two. We'll definitely have to see how these dew points occur over portions of Illinois, because we could see a sneaky little tornado or two up there if the environment can just become prime enough. So we'll have to see. With that being said, hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Let me know how you guys like this new format here with everything that we've been doing on the channel. Hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.